It can stay up there. Got what I need out of it. Okay.
It's up.
is so much better than being up on stage. Yeah.
Yeah, you keep getting those, Lyle. But you keep taking those COVID tests.
I had that bad cough.
Uh-huh. Tested again. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. We appreciate you all joining us today. My name is Rex Facer. I'm the chair of the commission. Let me introduce the members of the commission that we have with us today. We have Commissioner Christine Durham, Commissioner Lyle Hilliard, Commissioner Jeff Baker, and Commissioner Karen Hale. And we have two other commissioners who were unable to be with us today, Commissioner Rob Bishop and Commissioner Bill Thorne, and we excuse them. We also want to note that we had Senator Vickers was going to be joining us, but unfortunately he's had some personal issues arise that made him unable to join us. Oh, we do now have Commissioner Bishop with us by Zoom, so glad to have you, Commissioner Bishop. Want to give you kind of an overview of both the process that we're going through, as well as some of the kind of parameters that we're using, the criteria that we're using as we try and draw the maps. So let me just very briefly, I know many of you are familiar with the impetus for the commission. It came about as a result of Proposition 4 back in 2018. And then after the proposition, the legislature through Senate Bill 200 reached a compromise with better boundaries, and they then made some changes to the commission such that the commission is now an advisory commission to the legislature. We will make our recommendations to the legislature on November 1st, and the legislature will then have the ultimate decision on which maps they will approve. Now, in setting up the commission, we were set up as an independent commission, and so we don't report to anybody except ourselves, and ultimately to the legislature. But it was established as a bipartisan effort, and so half of the members of the commission, 3 of the members, were selected by the Republican leadership of the legislature, and that is Commissioner Jeff Baker, who was selected as an independent, and then Commissioner Lyle Hilliard and Commissioner Rob Bishop, who were selected as Republican representatives. And then from the Democratic side, they also selected 3 representatives, Commissioner Karen Hale and Commissioner Christine Durham as the Democratic representatives, and then Commissioner Thorne as the independent commissioner from the Democratic side. And then I was appointed by Governor Cox. And I'm just very grateful to my colleagues that we've been working in a very collegial way, and there has not been a kind of partisan divide or anything of that nature in the work of the commission, which is very appreciated. So after we got established, we then started meeting back in April. Normally, in normal times, non-pandemic times, the census data would have come out in April, and we would have been theoretically able to start drawing maps shortly after that. Unfortunately, we didn't receive the data from the Census Bureau until late in August. And so it then took us a couple of weeks to get the data up into the software, into the mapping software that many of you had a chance to look at. And so we didn't start mapping until around the first part of September. But since then, we've had mapping teams. So we've divided the commission up into 3 teams, 2 teams of 2 and 1 team of 3. And each of the teams has been charged with drawing draft maps. And these are maps that, as we've seen today, are designed to elicit discussion and feedback. These are not the final maps that we will be recommending. What we want is we want to get feedback from all of you, and the feedback that I've heard already has been very helpful because it gets us thinking about things that we otherwise wouldn't. As you may have noted, the commission is largely represented from the northern part of the state. I'm the furthest member south, and I live in Spanish Fork. So we have a deficit of knowledge of Southern Utah. And so it's critical that we get the feedback from all of you to help us understand the different issues that you're facing down here. And as we draw the boundaries to make sure we understand what makes sense to those of you down here. And so again, the feedback that we receive from you and from your friends and neighbors, we encourage you to have them share their voices as well. There are a number of ways, and we'll talk a little bit about that shortly, that people can engage with the commission. But I want to move now to the criteria that we're using as we're drawing the maps. We have a series of criteria. The first and foremost criteria is one that's essentially based out of the Constitution that requires that there be one person and one vote, so that a person in Southern Utah has the same level of representation as a person in Eastern Utah, as a person in Northern Utah. And so as a result, each one of the districts has to be essentially the same size. Now, for the congressional districts, that means that each district has to have a population of 817,904. Now, we can have a small variation to that, but to have any variation, we have to essentially be able to justify it by one of the other criteria. So we can't just say, well, we're off by 2,000 here and off by another 2,000 there just because we felt like it. It has to be driven by the criteria. And so first and foremost, we're looking at balancing those populations so they're equal across the districts. And just to give you some context on the other districts that we're drawing, the state Senate is looking at a population of 112,814, the state House 43,622, and the state school board 218,108. And so one of the challenges that you immediately get, and I know that several of you were already picking up on this, is that when you're in a county like Iron County that has a population of 57,289, it means that you've got enough for a House district, but not enough for a Senate district. And so the question that we have for you in this process is, who do you want to be combined with? Who does it make most sense for you to be combined with to pick up the rest of that 112,000? So you're about halfway there. Where's the other half going to come from? And so that's one of the big questions that we have as we look out across these issues is it's not just where do we draw the lines. In some ways, we could have a computer draw the lines for us. But what we want is we want to make those lines knowing something about the preferences of the people who live there. And so that's why we've been reaching out. So not only are we holding a series of public hearings, but we've also had our staff going out to community events and festivals around the state to try and get input that way. We've collected over 400 maps of what we call communities of interest, which is one of the criteria that we're looking at. And so we've had 400 people draw a boundary for the area that they think is similar. And so it might be a neighborhood, it could be a city, it could be an area where economic activity occurs. And so a community of interest, it really has kind of a lot of potential. It could be a cultural identity. It could be a religious identity. And so there really are kind of a large set of possibilities for what a community of interest is. We need people to tell us those. And then we have a process through the GIS system that we're taking those communities of interest and we're then displaying them visually so that we can see kind of where those communities coalesce. In addition to the equal size districts, there are two other kind of preeminent criteria. The next one that's preeminent is contiguity. So a district has to be touching another part of the district. So, for example, let's say we've got the 57,000 people here in Iron County, and I'm going to make up a county so that I don't pick on anybody. Let's assume that there's a Smith County, and they happen to have the exact additional amount of population necessary. We can't just pick up the Smith County and Iron County if they're not touching. And so, as a result, we have to be looking at places like Beaver County, Washington County, places that are touching Iron County when we make those decisions. So it has to be contiguous. The next thing that we're charged to try and do is compactness. Now, compactness, so if we created a district, a house district, for example, for Cedar City, and did you have that number for me too, Lyle? Oh, okay.
Cedar City goes most of the county.
So Cedar City has enough that it's largely able to create a house district on its own, and so that can be a fairly compact district, right? A small geography. Now there are other parts of the state. So if we go over to Wayne County, for example, where there are 5,000 to 7,000 people, that's a rather large geography, and so we're going to have to be putting that with other large geographies just because of the sparsely populated and dispersed populations across parts of southeastern Utah, for example, as well as kind of central and western Utah. And so even though we have a challenge to be compact, we know some of our districts aren't going to be able to be compact just because of the geography and the dispersion of the population across that geography. But where possible, we're going to try and be as compact as we can. The other, so I mentioned communities of interest. Another thing that we're trying to pay attention to are geographical boundaries. So where we can and where it makes sense to use something like a river, a mountain range, a highway, a bridge, something that kind of naturally divides a community. If we can use that as a split line, then we're charged with using that as a split line. We've also been charged with looking at the cores of prior districts. Now, one of the challenges we have with looking at the cores of prior districts is we've had some dramatic growth in certain parts of the state. Our growth across the state has not been even. So, for example, down in Washington County, it's been one of the fastest growing parts of the state. Iron County has grown rapidly as well, just not as much. And so what happens is we have to then shift the representation towards those areas that have had the faster levels of growth, which means that we're pushing down here to southeast or southwestern Utah. There will be some more representation down in the greater southwestern part. There will be some more representation that goes up to northern Utah County, southwestern Salt Lake County, and away from, for example, Salt Lake County, but also away from some of the rural parts of the state that have had either stagnant population where have actually seen population decline. And so in some ways, it's kind of like squeezing a balloon, right? And so when you start getting additional pressure one place, that pushes the boundary to have to expand into those other areas. But we are still trying to pay attention to those because it makes some sense for people to have continuity of representation. And so if that makes sense, we want to pay attention to it. If it doesn't make sense, then we're going to use other criteria to drive those decisions. We've also been asked to try and keep municipalities and counties together as much as possible. And so if it's possible for us to not split Cedar City, we want to try and not do that, for example. But one of the challenges that we have in doing that is it depends on where you start drawing on which communities you end up having to split. So for example, last night we were down in Washington, and we had a member of the public who said, don't split Washington City because it's currently split in kind of a north-south. And we were looking at some of our maps, and when we start drawing our maps in St. George, by the time we come over to the last part of St. George, because it doesn't have enough to have complete districts, it's got to start spilling over. And so it starts spilling over into Washington. That then pushes us to split Washington. Where on the other hand, if we start with Washington, then we can keep Washington whole. But that then means we end up splitting St. George in different sorts of ways. And so the decisions on keeping communities whole, it's important to us, but it also depends on where we start and how that ends up. And the worst part is when you get to what we have affectionately called the buckle, when you get to the very end and you have to bring all of the districts together in that last place. And it can get really challenging, as Commissioner Hale and I struggled as all of a sudden we're off by several hundred, because on the House and Senate maps, we can have greater variation. We still want to try and keep that variation as small as possible. But if all of a sudden we have in several districts where we're over by, say, 200, when we get to the last district, we may now be under by 1,500. And that's too wide of a variation. So now all of a sudden you've got to start pushing back and fixing all of the other variations, which is why some of my colleagues have been very focused on trying to get down to that very small difference. And then after we've got that, then we're going to push back against that as we have larger conversations about these other criteria. We want to try and have boundary agreement across the types of districts. Now, the challenge there is we don't have an equal divisibility between the number of Senate districts and the number of House districts. So we have 29 Senate districts, 75 House districts. 29 doesn't get divided into 75 in a nice even number. Now, for the state school board, where we have 15 and 75, that does work out nicely, and it's possible. And so, one of the maps that some of my colleagues have drawn has tried to use that school boards and put the House, or to take the House and put the school boards. You can go either way, but try to make sense of that. The last thing that I want to mention on our criteria is something that we're trying to not pay attention to in our mapping. So the statute requires that we don't favor or disfavor political parties, candidates, potential candidates. And so as a result, we have chosen to not look at political data when we're drawing our maps. And so in the decision making about our maps, we don't have any of that political data. And so last night, I think it was Commissioner Durham commented that somebody had been reviewing one of the maps that her team drew, and they say, gosh, look, it's clear that they've gerrymandered this to benefit this party. And her reaction was, I had no idea, because we don't have that data. And so we're looking at the kind of base population data that comes from the census. And that comes down into what they call census blocks. That's the smallest unit. But census blocks, they aren't shaped the same everywhere. Some of them are long and skinny. Some of them have big bubbles. Some of them kind of go around other places. Some of them have populations of, well, 0. So we have a lot of those out in the uninhabited parts of the state, but some of them will have a population of 20 or 10. Others will have populations of 500 or 600. And we can't split blocks. And so when we're drawing, we have to use the blocks where people were actually living when the 2020 census was conducted. So that gives you kind of an overview of the criteria that we're using, the broad process that we've tried to engage in. Is there anything else that members of the commission? Please, Commissioner Durham.
I just wanted to add a footnote in case people felt slighted by the observation that the commission doesn't have anybody from Southern Utah. At this stage of our work, we are working approximately 3 to 4 days a week from between 3 hours and 8 hours a day. And I think when the commission was formed, there was a realization that to bring some of our commissioners are traveling from fair distances and are commuters, and it's very hard on them, and it's hard to imagine how someone could do the round trip from Cedar City, for example, on that kind of a scale. You'd basically have to move to Taylorsville, which probably wouldn't be a good plan. Thank you.
I was just that I live in Logan, so I drive every day. It's 8 o'clock in the morning, and I get home usually about 9 o'clock at night, and that's every day of the week. I guess I could stay down in Salt Lake overnight, but I would rather sleep in my own bed, and I hate to drive through Davis County and their traffic. So that's and they bring lunch into us, and you can see this all on YouTube. So you can turn on YouTube and you can see Judge Thorne and I, as we're doing our districts, as we're talking about things. I just like to add one other thing as we're doing this thing that makes it so difficult. The numbers become very, very important, but we don't know. I have no idea. When I look at Cedar City, do we keep one district together of the 43,000? What do I do on a Senate district? Because that's 112. You only have 57,000 living in your county. Where do I go? I can't go west. I've got to go north, east, or south. And Washington County is pretty full already. So, and again, I'm an old timer. Grew up with Jerry Sherritt as one of my best friends, and I just, as I recall, the feelings between Cedar City and St. George weren't always the best. And so I think it's important as we do this districting, leave a senator in Cedar City and a senator in St. George. I don't think you want all of your Senate representation out of the St. George area, even though they'd be very kindly towards Cedar City. I think you have a unique situation here we need to protect.
Thank you, Commissioner Hilliard and Commissioner Durham. And I really appreciate Commissioner Hilliard mentioning YouTube, because one of the things that we're trying to do on the commission is be very transparent. And so with our mapping teams, anytime we're mapping, we broadcast it on YouTube. And so it might not necessarily make for riveting TV watching, but it does make for transparent TV watching. So if you see one of the maps over here and you go, gosh, what in the heck were they thinking? You can actually go back to our YouTube, kind of scan through to see where we're at on that part of the map, and you can hear us talking through that issue. One of the things that people can do is on the maps, they can submit comments. When those comments are submitted, our staff brings them to us, even when we're drawing maps, we can see those. The comments that are submitted at UIRC comments at utah.gov, those come to us and we pay attention to them. And we pay attention to the things that are told to us in the public hearings. And I can guarantee you, Commissioner Hale and I were a mapping team, and we were already mentioning, oh boy, we've got to go back and look at what we did here, and to one, see if we can understand why we did it, but more importantly, can we take into consideration the comments that we've already heard from you? Anything else, please, Commissioner Hale?
Thank you. And just to reemphasize what everybody has said, and as we look at the makeup of the commission as well, that's why your attendance here is so important today. As Chair Facer was saying, just the comments that you made today are really going to inform what we do next week when we sit down, to map and to look at the existing maps and as we create new maps. So, so I really feel I'm compelled to tell you to encourage your neighbors, your family, your friends to be engaged in this process, because representation is important. As we talked to a couple who, has come here to voice their opinion and to find out more. And, just that's the whole crux of this is representation. And we want you to feel like this is a fair process. We want this to be a fair process. The state of Utah residents voted for this, for the initiative in 2018. They wanted an independent process so they could feel like people wanted to feel like there was fair representation when it came to map drawing. So your presence today is important. Your continued input is important. And we will take that input to inform the maps that we're creating. They're not our maps. They are what our executive director has called the people's maps. And we want to be confident when we go to the legislature on November 1st that we've really reflected the people's wishes as we've created these maps together. Thanks.
Thank you. One other thing that I kind of glossed over, I mentioned we have these map drawing teams. In the map drawing teams, we have made an explicit effort to not pair appointees from the same political party. So, for example, we have Commissioner Hilliard talked about he's mapping with Judge Bill Thorne, and Commissioner Hilliard was appointed by the Republicans. Commissioner Thorne, who's an independent member, but was appointed by the Democrats. Commissioner Durham is mapping with Commissioner Baker and Commissioner Bishop. And so there are two that, an independent and then a Republican appointee mapping with a Democratic appointee. And then I was appointed by the governor, and Commissioner Hale was appointed by the Democratic leadership. And so we've been trying to make sure that we don't have a partisan agenda, and we've done that in the specific design of how we're doing the mapping as well. And so we're committed, as Commissioner Hale just said, to representing the people's perspectives. And so we would like to get, at this point, some feedback. Let's see, Soraya, don't run away, because you're next on my agenda. So we just want to highlight again the ways in which people can participate. And so we've asked our staff, this is Soraya Mori, to share with us. Yeah, I believe that's on.
Okay. Yeah. So we've told some of you already, but just to kind of reiterate ways that you can help us out in the mapping process. So some of you have looked at some of these maps. You can see the drafted maps, and you can click on each one and look at the different maps that have been done. And remember, they're drafts, so they're made to be changed. So like Joe, if you click on congressional, you can go through and look at them. And then a really helpful tool is you'll see on the left, it comes up, there's a section where you can leave a comment. So you can put your information in just so that we know where you're commenting from. You can, then it'll let you choose which map you're commenting on, and then leave us feedback. So you can let us know where it's dividing incorrectly maybe, or what you like about it. It's also good feedback. So I think that this is really, really helpful for the commissioners because it's such specific feedback on what they've already been working on. Another way that you can help us out is by, you can show us communities of interest. So if you go to participate, you'll have an option to map your community, and there's a video on that shows how to do that. But this will allow you to just put a circle or a shape around a community of interest, and then you can let us know why that is important to you. And so that's just useful. Again, as we map, we don't know the whole state, as you know, and so then it just helps us know what is important to the people in each area that we visit, or anywhere. And so that's easy for people to do as well. If you really want to get into the software, you can hit map the state. I would suggest watching the video because that gives a little training on how to use it. But so that's if you really want to get into the mapping software that the commissioners are using and play around with that. And so that's another way. And then as Commissioner Chair Facer was saying, sorry, you can send us emails. Those are always helpful. You can take a picture of a map, draw on a map by hand. You can do whatever is helpful to you. And there's also a form online that will send us a comment. But any feedback is very welcomed and appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Soraya. And at this point, we want to transition to public comment. And I believe we have Mr. Phillips, who's on the city council. Is that correct? If you'd like to make a formal presentation on behalf of the city council, we'd be delighted to have that. Or if you just like to speak in your personal capacity, we would invite anybody that would like to make a public comment to just come up to the microphone. We're a small enough group that I think we can behave orderly. And we'll invite all of you now to come and make any public comments that you'd like to make sure that is, one, on the public record, and two, is going to be helpful to us as a commission in making better maps.
Well, it's a good thing I'm used to the stage because I wasn't prepared for this. I am campaigning, so I'm dressed like this today because I was out putting up signs, so I apologize. First of all, let me say thank you so much for all of the work that you're doing on this. And I know a good number of you, and I've appreciate all the work you do for our state very much so. And I've learned a lot in the brief time I've been here, and I recognize how difficult this process is. It's kind of like a referee in a ball game. You blow that whistle and 50% of the people are going to love you and 50% are going to hate you. So no matter what you do, right? I'm not speaking on behalf of the city, but I would like to at least acknowledge a couple of thoughts I have. And as it looks at Iron County, we are at a very particular place because we're big enough to be recognized, but we're still small enough that we have to join our neighbors and friends. I think a lot of our water issues and a lot of the things relative to the environmental growth of this area, we are more inclined, we're more in sync, and we're working with our northern neighbors in Enoch, the northern part of Cedar Valley, even far up as into Beaver County. That's not to say that we don't have interest with our friends and neighbors down in Washington County. We certainly do, and I think Representative Last has done a great job trying to represent both his constituents here in Iron County as well as down in Washington County. But as you look at particularly the house side of things in our area, if populations can allow it, I would encourage us to look and make sure that we include our neighbors and friends in Parowan and Summit and Enoch and that areas into perhaps that second House seat. If we can, there's about 37,000 people in Cedar City. So in Cedar City municipality. So we're close to having a municipality for a House seat. But then what do you do with those other 19,000 people in the county? And who do they couple with? Obviously, that's going to be the chore that you're going to be faced with. But I do think that from a agricultural standpoint, from an I-15 transportation corridor, it's really important that we have that ability with as far north as Beaver County down to New Harmony in that area. And I don't know if you can divide by mountain ranges or whatever, but New Harmony is more inclined to be with Iron County than it is with Washington County. I don't know how the rest of my audience feels, but at least those are some of my comments that I'd like to leave with you. So thank you very much for all your hard work.
Thank you very much.
My name's Chris Sorensen, and I want to thank all of you too as well. One of the questions I had, you mentioned in the variant. There's a variant for the numbers. Okay, so 1,500 versus 200. Okay, is that set by statute? That's my question. Is it a statutory number?
So there is a constitutional mandate. The courts have generally interpreted that to be less than 1%. I'm looking over at my legal counsel to make sure I don't misstate. But the legislature is not by statute, but by committee decision, set the parameters on the variation. And we've made a decision as a commission to use those same parameters that the legislative committee is established, because we don't want that to be a kind of out of hat reason that they reject our maps.
Okay, well, and I appreciate that. And my thought on that is 1,500 doesn't scare me. 15,000 scares me. Okay, but when it comes to like Scott said, to add these some of these maps we've seen to pull some of these rural areas into us, and there might be a difference, but it gets us into the 800 and 8.
Yeah, the 800 is on the congressional.
Yeah, and that's this example I was using. So,
Could I just interrupt
sure.
and point out that the statistical deviations are different for each type of map.
Okay,
So the deviations for the congressional districts are 2%. And then when you get to the Senate and the House and the school boards, they go up.
Great.
And they're as much as 10%.
and that's why I asked the question about the variant. The other thing.
Let me add one other thing
Okay.
that'll help you. We have a finite number of population. It's divided by 4, divided by 29, divided by 15. So if, for example, we were to put 2,000 more in a House district here, we've got to cut 2,000 out of someplace else,
Right.
because the number has to come out exactly the same, because we can't have people who don't live here counted, nor can we end up with say 500 people, not in any district at all, just how we do it. So that's kind of the balancing thing you do it.
Okay, and that leads me to my problem, and you both mentioned earlier that driving is a problem, that you drive all day, you get home and all that. Well, one of the maps, for example, has the northern part on the Idaho border and comes all the way down to San Juan. Now, I don't care what representative is, he ain't driving from Brigham City to Monticello. You guys, Grouse Creek, I know where it's at. I've been there. I'm just saying. So to me, you guys have got to take that in consideration. That's ridiculous, because what it means is that San Juan, wait a minute, there's only 7,000 people down there in Salt Lake City. Because I encompass it, I got 30,000. Who am I going to go as a politician and go have lunch with? I'm not worrying about the 7,000 in San Juan because I don't care. And that's the bigger thing for somebody like me. I look at some of these maps. There's a prime example, and we had a good conversation with one of the gentlemen, that you get to a certain point, and there was one map, I think it's orange, congressional orange. I love it, okay? It stops just short of Salt Lake, leaves us alone, lets us have Mona, gets us a little bit of that where we get all that ruralness. Something like that makes more sense, because I do not want a millionaire or a billionaire in Park City funneling money to their candidate, because then let's look at this part. And this is the last thing I would ask you guys to seriously consider. The candidate. Okay, Washington can have their own candidate. Yeah, there's a nice rural portion. If you had Iron County in there, we might get a candidate out of Cedar City. But you include us with part of Salt Lake or Park City, we're not getting a candidate past a primary. And if we do, it's going to be a miracle, because what do we say? 57,000 votes against Park City, who's got that in the city limits. Well, I understand that, but they got more money. And if they got a bigger area, they can spend more money. And then if you include Salt Lake, because some of those maps include part of Salt Lake, Park City, and then drop down into Iron County and encompass up, we will lose representation. And that was my last point. It's kind of hard to get taxed without representation, as the old cliche. But that's a big thing for us rural. We have more in common with people in Payson than we do in Salt Lake. We have more in common with Tooele, Juab. You keep us in that bubble, we're good. I just think, and I am so disappointed that there are not more people here, because this is ridiculous that we don't have more representation as a community. But the bottom line is you guys do have a hard job. I am a football coach. I understand when that whistle blows. All I'm trying to say is, look, keep the hanky in your pocket. Just keep it in your pocket. We don't have a problem. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Morning or afternoon, whatever it is now. I'm Dale Root. I live here in Cedar, proud Democrat. And I worked with Cale Weston a little bit when he came down to talk to as many rural people as he could. And he said he'd like to keep the district about the same. Congressional districts is there about the same amount of growth in each of the four? Okay.
Unfortunately not, yeah.
Yeah. Because I mentioned to him, I'd like to see just all of Southern Utah in one congressional district. And I feel that, being rural, that except for St. George, we're not very rural, but we would all have more in common than, like the gentleman just said, Park City, Salt Lake. So I personally would like to see our district at least move more northward and, cut out like the one that, like he's talking about, corner to corner. Poor guy, whoever that would be, I wouldn't want to be that representative. But at least if we could keep the rural southern portion, I believe, pretty much together, then we at least have a voice that's more in tune with the rural communities, which I know we don't get much representation up in Salt Lake. So, thank you.
Thank you very much.
My name is Glenn Little. I'm probably the only one who lives in Paroline here, but I'd like to amplify on what my friends Scott and Dale have said, is to try to keep the integrity as much as possible of our culture. Here in the southwestern part of the state, we're on the I-15 corridor, go up there. It doesn't seem to me to make too much sense to pair us with southeastern Utah. First of all, there's a mountain range between us. It's kind of hard to get from here to there, back and forth. And they have, their culture it's very similar, but it's different enough that it doesn't make sense to have us in the same congressional district. I kind of like the district, I think it was the Utah Orange one for the congressional thing, where we've got rural paired with rural. We don't go clear up into Summit County or into Davis County or a little bit of Utah County, but it's mostly the southwest or the western southwestern part of the state. That seems to make a lot of sense. But getting to probably my biggest concern is with the state legislative and Senate districts. At present, I live in Parowan. My representative is Mr. Last. Scott is represented by Rex Ship, yet we live close enough that we should be represented by have the same state legislator representing us. It doesn't make up, and it spreads poor Mr. Last. He's spread really thin, where Mr. Ship has a fairly contiguous district there. And it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. There's a slight cultural difference between us and Washington County. Washington County is a great place, but it's on the average of 10 to 20 degrees hotter, depending on which part of the which part of the year it is. I went to school up in Logan, so I really liked the summers up there. The winters were a little bit cold, but yeah, exactly. But it makes a lot more sense to pair us with maybe Beaver County or with maybe Garfield, Kane County. They're a little bit more, they're as rural as we are. We're still characterized as a pretty much a rural county, and it just makes a lot more sense from a representative. The candidates won't have to travel quite as much. Those sorts of things, and the culture, the cultural makeup will be a lot more homogeneous from that point of view. Thank you very much for coming down and listening to us.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah.
My husband's people are from Carolina, and it's nice to have you stay up.
I was born and raised in Cedar City. I feel more like a Cedar guy living in Parowan, so I'll throw that disclaimer in there.
Thank you. Others that would like to share some comments?
Hello, my name is Paul Roland, and I'm been a citizen here for about 20 years. Worked for the National Park Service for 40 years and retired recently. And I just wanted to let you know about an organization called Iron County Vision 2050. And we've been around actually for a couple of years. We had some good opportunities. We've created there's a very good public survey if you've never seen it. It's available, and I can share that information with you, how you can find it online. But it's identified 12 of the most important things that most of our citizens think are most important. And so the Iron County Vision 2050 Committee has now hired a full-time VISTA student. She's great. She's 22 years old, and she's really full of fire, and she's getting things going. So she's working 40 hours a week, trying to now begin to bring these committees together. And I'm really here to just learn about this whole redistricting commission and the work you do. I know that it's it's a labor of love, and it's something that really has to happen. And I'm really glad to see the work you're doing. And we'll be sharing what's going on with your commission with those on our committee and those who began to, some of our membership. So thank you very much for everything you do.
Well, thank you. And we appreciate anybody that has additional information to share with us to help us understand the issues that are going on. That it really does make us more sensitive to the issues. And if we're not sensitive to them, then we have no ability to pay attention. So, any other comments anybody else would like to make? Joy, no, please, Commissioner Hilliard.
Thank you. I like to play a game with you and give you our difficult job that we have. We have to come up with 817,904 for 4 congressional districts. We can vary by 800. You'd have 800 more or 800 less. But it concerns if we were any different than that, Then we go to some subjective issues of what is a community of interest. And I suspect that I could raise issues here that you would disagree on. As is that really a community of interest or not that we should consider as we do that? When they did it 10 years ago, there was a big debate. And I think let me put it this way. We could do that by taking Weber County, Davis County, and some of Salt Lake County and making district number 1. We could take Utah County and part of Salt Lake County and district number 2. We could take Salt Lake County as number 3. And number 4 would be from Grouse Creek, St. George, Blanding, Vernal, back up through to Rich County to Bear Lake. And like you say, who in the world would want to have a seat in a position like that to do it? And so what the legislature did, and it's called a donut hole. You have one in Salt Lake. They've tried to do a pizza. And so that Salt Lake touched 3 of the districts. Salt Lake's going to have to be 2 districts anyway. They're 1.1 million and 817,000. They're going to have to be split some way. So how do you do it? Now, I have people in Salt Lake who say, I don't have any interest in St. George. Don't put that in my district. My district is strictly Salt Lake. And so you have to kind of balance it as you talk at the number. So I want you to think for a minute, if you had to do that, would you want us to do all Wasatch Front for 3 of the districts? I was really concerned when they did it the way they did, that you'd end up with 4 congressmen from Salt Lake, because you hit really right with Park City. The Salt Lake area probably has the most money, the most people that you know about. And I was really concerned because in Congress, you don't have to live in your district. Jason Chavis didn't live in his district. Jim Matheson didn't live in his district. Ben McAdams didn't live in his district. And currently Blake Moore doesn't live in his district. So that's federal law. We have no control over that. So I want you to think for a minute how you really would do this. And I can't see in fairness any way you can do it without giving some of the rural area into each of these geographical areas. And for example, you raised a really good point. I don't know if I'd want to go to San Juan County for 7,000 people or whatever the count is, but there's some very, very important federal issues that our congressman there has to know about and be able to handle. Bears Ears is not a central or a southeastern Utah problem. It's an issue for Salt Lake. It's for all of us. So that's important. Now let's move to the second area, state senators. I want to give you some figures. As you know, 213,000 makes a state senator. Washington County has 180,000. 112, excuse me. Okay, almost 113. But the point I want to make is Washington County is 180. So that gives them 1 state senator plus about 78,000 people left over. Now that's more than half of the rest. Do I take Cedar City and put it with the other half of Washington County? Because Washington County has a problem. They can't go west, they can't go south. They can only go east and north. And so if we do that, where do I draw the line in Cedar City? I don't know anything about Cedar City, whether 3rd North would be a good place to draw a line or 4th South or wherever. I don't know. And that's what we need as we get these maps out. And these maps are only proposals to make you think about it. So when you see them, and we read your emails, we get when we meet, we read them and look at them. Don't send me an email and say, Iron County is so special that we ought to have 2 state senators. Because I mean, I won't even read it because it doesn't make any sense. So I understand what you're saying. So in state senators, how do we do that? As I said personally, I think Cedar City's got to have a state senator. I mean, SUU, what you do in that is so important that we have to have one to do that. Now we go to House districts. They can have, Washington County again can have 4 House districts. They have then about 10,000 people left over. Do we take New Harmony and bring it up here? And what if New Harmony is 15,000 people? Where do we draw the line in New Harmony to get those people who stay in Washington with that representative and come here? Now I'll give you really a crazy idea. If you got 57,000, why don't we create 2 districts in Iron County, one with about 30,000 in each district? Then you can have 2. Possibly you could elect 2. And how do you align that and do that? Now, I think it's interesting when you make a comment about Parowan not being, and you want the same one. When I was first elected to the House, I served in leadership of the House with Norm Bangeter, and I represented the north part of Rich County. I had Bear Lake. And Glenn Brown, who sat next to me, who was the assistant or the majority whip, represented, he was from Colville. He represented Randolph, the south part of Rich County. I had a county commissioner in Rich County say, we want our own representative. And I said, now, wait a minute. You've got roughly 1,200 people. You're never going to have your own representative. But instead, you've got two people in leadership of the House. And so let me say the problem. When you have a Brad Last and you have Rex Ship, if Cedar City has a problem or Iron County has a problem, they have two spokesmen up there. They have two people who can advocate it. And again, I don't think we're ever going to end up with dividing Cedar City and putting 30,000 or Iron County putting 28,000 in one and 28 in the other. So hopefully you'd control the 43. I don't think we'll ever do that. But if I were an Iron County commissioner, I'd say, I'd like to have one guy living in North Cedar City and one in South Cedar City in these two House districts representing Iron County in the legislature. So I want you to think about it as you start drawing lines. These numbers really drive what we are. And we could care less about politics. Now, I'm going to mention something else. We cannot do a district based on race. We cannot come back and say there are 50,000 Hispanic people living in this area, so we're going to create a House district for them. But we do have to, when we do our lines, go back and look and say, have we impacted negatively some minority people? I don't think we have a lot of African Americans here, but we have a lot of Hispanics. And Justice Durham was just pointing out to me that Paiute County has almost 25% Hispanic according to their thing. And I was shocked to see that. But we have to be careful when we get through, and that's what we'll do. When we get through, we'll go back and look at, did we do something really stupid? We're counting trees. We need to step back and look at the forest. Now, let me share the other one. We do school districts for the state school board, 15 members. And so if we drive the districts, we're just under 220,000 a district. So we can have a district in Washington County and Iron County, but we're over. What part of Iron County or what part of Washington County do we move into another school district? And that's the really tough things that we have to do. And so when we get through, I think Justice Durham said it very well last night. Somebody looked at a map, one of the maps again, and chewed her out for being politically biased. And we have no idea. But I'm sure people are going to look at it and say, why in the world did you cut Cedar City this way or Parowan this way? I'll say, because we had to get the numbers. And they say, well, disregard the numbers. We'll be out of court. And the legislature, I think, is very sensitive, and their attorneys are very sensitive that you don't want to be sued. And so they're looking at the things and trying to do that. So if we ended up even with the best map in the world and it's 2,000 off for this one special thing, we had to have a darn good reason to say why that's unique there and why we didn't do the same thing in Brigham City or the same thing in Richfield or as we're doing these types of things. So I want you to think about it because I don't want the answers today. I want you to go home and get at the website and think to yourself, at least take time. I know Judge Thorne and I spent 2 full days doing the House districts. House districts are really hard. And I say, so when somebody sends me a map and says, well, I want you to do this for this city, it's dominoes effects and how it applies to everyone else. And it doesn't take very long to see that as you start doing the program. Judge Thorne and I worked on the idea, it's like a jigsaw puzzle. You do the outside first, and then you can work with the inside because the insides can move different ways. The outside are limited in how they can move it. But we really appreciate your input. And again, I don't know if we talk about timeline, we've got to be done by the 1st of November because we make our recommendations to the legislature under the Constitution. They make the final decision, not us. And so they have to make a decision. They have to hold a session of the legislature and pass it. So it's all in place before January 1st, because on January 1st, if you're running for the legislature, you begin collecting signatures. And you can't begin collecting signatures really until you know exactly where your district is going to be. And so that puts us under a very strict deadline, and we'll do it. And I've said before, it's going to be very hard to do it, but we'll do it. And that's why it's taken so much of our time to do it. And so when people flippantly look at Justice Durham's map that she helped put together and say, oh, they have no idea how much time we put in. And we really need you, because I think when we get home and start talking about this, we're going to be raising the issues. What about Parowan? Do we need to really put them into Cedar City? What do we do with New Harmony? How do we divide and cut that out? How do we put all of that together? But again, I'm looking as a past legislator. I always loved an issue that I had 3 or 4 other legislators to speak with me on, that I wasn't a lone wolf out there trying to do something for Cedar City, when if I had another legislator equally helping me, how important that is. So again, support job, and we'll get it done. It's like I heard Dutch Belknap, the coach of Utah State, says refereeing is a terrible job and they do a terrible job. And that's kind of our job.
Thank you very much. I do want to just, as we draw, to a close, I want to highlight that our goal is to produce good maps, and maps that will then make it easy for the legislature to use our maps. But the only way we can do that is, as has been said many times, is by getting your input and having you advocate for these maps as well. We want to encourage you the legislature they have the Legislative Redistricting Committee, which will be coming down this way in a little while. And we want to encourage you to also share your thoughts with them. We will do everything we can to make your voices heard, but echoing what you've told us to them is important. We're taking very different strategies on how we kind of do the maps, and we've been spending time, as has been said, drawing the maps, and we think that helps us understand your comments much more effectively. But we really need everybody's participation and engagement. Are there any final comments from any of the other members of the commission? Okay. With that, we'll close the public comment session. And I don't see any motions from our staff, so I think we're good. So I will entertain a motion to adjourn. This meeting is concluded. Thank you very much.